Okay, so pretend you didn't recognize this as the definition of a derivative, and you're just like, it's a limit, I'm going to attack. So let's do that. Let's just try to plug in h is 0 and see what happens. So we would get the sine of 3 pi halves plus 0, and then minus the sine of 3 pi halves, and then if h is 0, we have got over 0, and sine of 3 pi halves minus sine of 3 pi halves, that's 0 over 0. So this is an indeterminate form. It's not very happy. In fact, it triggers L'Hopital's rule, which is going to be the other way I'm going to solve this later. But for right now, let's pretend you didn't know L'Hopital's rule and you still wanted to solve this. There is yet another way, and that is with your sum formulas for sine and cosine. So be very careful. You can't distribute a sine. This is not a thing. Don't do it. But we do know that the sine of a plus b is this trig identity here. So let's use it, see what happens. So we get limit as h goes to 0, sine 3 pi halves cosine h plus cosine 3 pi halves sine h. So that's this using our sum formula. And then I'm going to subtract the sine of 3 pi halves, and then it's all over h. And now it's like, well, I know what the sine and the cosine of 3 pi halves are. We're down here. So the sine is just a -1. So I'll plug that in. The sine of 3 pi halves is -1 times the cosine of h. And then the cosine of 3 pi halves is 0. So this whole thing just goes to 0. And then minus the sine of 3 pi halves. So that's minus -1. And then we're all over h. So now if I just rearrange this, this is 1, and then I'm subtracting the cosine of h, and it's all over h. Now, unfortunately, this is something that we memorize in the beginning part of our calculus career. Later on, we can prove it with L'Hopital's rule, and it is proven when they first teach it to us, but because we don't want to do the proof over and over and over again, it is one of the ones that we do have memorized, and this we memorize that exact form is 0, and it does match the answer that we got in method 1, and it will match the answer that we're going to do with L'Hopital's rule in method 3. So it feels like a little bit of cop out at the end that we did have this memorized, but that is how you learn it in the beginning. Okay, so there's method 2, and then we'll do method 3.